So for the final week of the fashion theme, I'm going to be looking at producing a small oil sketch based on some of the ideas that I've been looking at for my composition. So I've been working with some drawings and paintings of my daughter, doing some sewing and putting it together with some of the tailor's dummies that were around the house. And down here, I can just show you, I've put together a charcoal sketch in which, a little bit like what I had suggested as homework, I've got a couple of working seamstresses. So this is just the charcoal arrangement, and I've played around with that a bit because I want this sort of sequence of figures, but I tried varying the scale and the position, and actually I ended up cutting up the drawing a bit because I think I wanted to have that middle dummy placed something like that. Again, I wanted this sort of receding column of figures. The other thing that strikes me about what I've got in this first version, I didn't put in anything of a setting, anything of a background, and I quite liked that because it reminded me of when I've seen, certainly when we've been to the Lyceum wardrobe and seen the costume makers at work, they're often in these large empty spaces, just in the company of these silent tailor's dummies. So I thought I would experiment with not actually describing very much of the setting, but drawing attention to the working figures, basically by using their shadows. So I'm going to set up to paint in oils, and I'm going to paint wet in wet, and extol to you some of the virtues of using that approach as a way of working ideas out. So I'm set up with some white canvas. I've got my charcoal sketch beside the canvas. The canvas is about A4, and I'm going to begin by covering it with some grey because I want to work on a wet surface. And I've made this, it's not quite mid-tone, but I've made it fairly dark because I'm quite keen. I think I'm painting an interior scene. The workers in the sewing workshop, and I think it'll help to be able to not only darken things, but also to be able to put on light. So I want to manage the light in there. So by putting on the grey, I've got rid of the white. I've got a slightly wet, fluid surface, but it's not too wet. You can see I've spread it all out. I do want the paint to mix as I work, because that'll soften things, it'll unify my image, but I don't want it to be so wet that I can't manage the mixing. So I've now mixed up a brown, and I'm working with a number 2 brush, and I'm really just beginning in monochrome, working very much on the basis of what's in my charcoal sketch. And I actually moved this first dummy over to the left a bit. So I think that should be a bit different, slightly shorter. So you can see, as you'd expect, when I work into the wet grey paint, this brown that I started with loses its edge. It becomes less dark. But that's something that I'm keen on exploiting, because, let's see where that goes to. Because really what I want to demonstrate this time is how the oil sketch and this mixing and softening can actually help you with the process of deciding how to resolve or how to complete the painting idea. So as I've said, all these dark marks that I make actually become lighter, softer, greyer. And so although I think I've got an idea, I think I know what my idea is, this process of sketching things out with the colour unified, but losing some of its definition, can be really helpful in directing, if you like, the outcome of the painting. So I'll get everything down in monochrome. I'm working from my drawings. When I get to colour, I'll take out my paintings that I showed you at the beginning, because I want to take the colour from them. And my original reference material was photographic. So depending on where I get to with this sketch, I may want to look at the photographs. But of course, as we know, drawing is an excellent way of editing. And so there'll be less, but hopefully the essential information will be in my drawings. And I won't need too much reference to the painting. And in that way, not to the painting, to the photograph. In that way, I'll hopefully be a little bit, well, firstly, with the editing, a bit more focused on what I want. But also I'll be getting a less involved, that's perhaps the same as more focused, a less involved result. So that's my composition. And as I've said, I want to really make the shadows partly connect the figures to each other, connect them to the floor, and also create an atmosphere. So I got most things where I wanted them to be. I made a slight adjustment. So again, I want to just demonstrate to you this could be a real virtue of the oil sketch. You can smudge things, rub them out, and make adjustments where necessary without losing that unifying effect of the grey underpainting. So that's almost all I want to do. There's quite strong light and shadow on all of my subject, but particularly on these Taylor's dummies, on some of the material. So I think it would be worth strengthening some of these darks, maybe especially in the foreground. All right, that's the array. I think that is the arrangement that I want. I might just try one or two more darks, and you can just see as I make these adjustments, when I make something darker, then it stands out a bit. And what I'm hoping to demonstrate with this video and with those who come into the studio and produce an oil sketch is the idea that working on this scale where we can't get into much detail, where things are wet and fluid and will change and can be changed, a lot of things can be worked out which can then inform, if I were to go on and do a larger or more involved piece of work. There will be things that I can work out on this scale, and that point about it being small and wet means that I can't define things, I can't get into much detail, and defining things is defining just in a very loose way, and that's very helpful, I think. As I've described, darkening in places makes certain things stand out, and that's a balance that I can experiment with quickly on this scale. So So now I've got those painted studies that I showed you at the beginning, just to get some reference for colour. And if we just look at my palette, I have prepared stocks of colour, usually trying to make a light and a shaded version of each colour. So I'll start by just blocking in some of the bigger areas of the background. I wasn't quite sure what colours to use for these. I'm being influenced by, I suppose, what are the colours of our interior, because that's where these drawings and photographic references came from. So that's really just a warm grey, but I've got something lighter that I can introduce. Because in fact those drawings and photographs were done at this time of year, but actually during lockdown, and we had some amazing light coming into the space. So I think I'd like a little bit of light. So that's what I did here. I made the grey, and then I've lightened it a bit, really from the black and the ochre. So I'm not quite sure where that's going yet, but as I've said, that's part of the idea of this oil sketch. It's small scale, it's easy to change and manipulate, and that means I can explore some of those ideas. But firstly, I just want to get that blocked in, and I've done something similar for the floor, and I think I'm going for that lighter pink version, and I'm interested in these shadows as a way of bringing out the figures, so I'll also be putting a shadow colour into this floor. And you can see each time I carry on painting, the paint on the end of my brush isn't clean. It's lost some of its edge because it's mixed with the grey. But I think that's not a bad effect for this initial stage where I'm making decisions about how things should appear. It gives me a number of versions, if you like, the stronger, more definite colour, or the subdued one. So I can think on that, so maybe we'll get some of the dark at the back. So what I'm trying to illustrate is there are things I haven't made my mind up about. I don't know what happens here, how far back I go, but because I started on the grey, I think the image is reasonably well unified, and so I don't have to make those decisions yet. But I did prepare some of the colours for this first mannequin. So I'll get some of that on, because whilst I've begun by blocking in some of the large areas of the floor and the wall, the background, I've still got plenty of options to adjust them depending on how I feel about the way these other colours are going on. So I might be thinking in terms of what colours to make most important, what colours to emphasise. And I really need to see things working together in order to come to any sort of conclusion about the way they're meant to be. So again, I'm promoting the idea of the sketch, the oil sketch, working wet in wet as something that can be manipulated and adjusted quite quickly, quite easily, in order to give more emphasis to certain parts of the painting, either by bringing things out defining them with more colour, with more definition, or by subduing things, by working them in a bit. So now I'm ready to start blocking in at least one of the figures, and I've decided to go with the same green jumper and red hair. So whether they both get the same combination, shall have to see. To get that right with those, need to see my drawing, to see what those hands are doing. Okay. Yeah, there's a bit more of a lean over. But as I've said, this is all part of a process of selecting what's going to get the emphasis and what will take second place. Maybe do a bit of hair first. Because what I would like to emphasize as well, I think, is sort of, well, it's a combination of quiet, concentrated work, but quite dynamic positions that these figures are in. So getting the angle of the head right matters to me. I just want to put a bit of light onto these as well. And of course that means that the head and the hands, which will also be very significant, are being saved for, well, almost for last. I want to get some of these other effects working. And then I decided I was in two minds about the material. Would it be the material that's already on these tailor's dummies, or would it be something different? And again, with my reference material, Inez was working with this kind of bright green, shiny material, which I thought I would like to feature. So that's developing. The last thing that I'll talk about and do is just adjusting some of these colours in relation to what's there. So probably because I increased the greens, or introduced the greens to the composition, I now feel like I'd like to strengthen some of these red, pink colours which are around the figures. So I've remixed that colour with a bit more cadmium red and yellow ochre. But also because what I was doing originally when I first laid them down, because I was painting into the wet grey, they will have lost some of their edge. So I've got that range. I can put things on fresh and brighten them up, or I can work them in a little if necessary to control that mixing and the effect of those colours. So is that a bit strong in the shadow? We'll see. So that's what I'm doing there, adjusting things because of the impact of new colours, and I can move around. So what would I do next? I'd possibly darken the top, actually. That might be useful, just to bring the attention down, and then I'll work on the other figure and deal with the head and the hands. I've darkened the top of the composition a little bit, and now I'm just getting a little bit of colour into the head and the hands. I'm wanting to restate or create the working poses of the figure. So what I've tried to demonstrate then is just the virtue of the oil sketch, working on a small scale, trying to work a little bit wet in wet, and being ready to exploit those conditions to make adjustments to the composition in order to emphasize certain things, deal with the balance of colour and attention. And if there's a particular narrative or a theme or an aim that you might have to your painting, then making those adjustments to give particular emphasis can be what it's all about. Okay, so see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.